Thanks, Sam. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for this webinar. I need a hygienist now. So, yeah, it's really exciting two topics that we've got today. So, we've got Dermot on urgent, and we've got Anne for mentoring. So, yeah, I think it's going to be a really packed session. So I won't keep you too long. When I was thinking about urgency and mentoring and being a hygienist, I thought of what's called the Friday special, and I'm a private consultant working for a risk management company, and so Fridays tend to be the time when we get these Friday specials come in, and you probably guess what that may be. A client is called with an issue or an incident, and they're wanting it to be sorted out ASAP, either that day or the weekend or even Monday morning. So I actually had one last Friday, and so yes, it's quite poignant that we're doing this on Friday. So I haven't yet got my Friday special yet, which is good, but the fact that I've mentioned it means that I may get one. So yeah, so I think it's going to be a really good session to do with urgency, because I think that's very topical for hygienists, and you know, we get paid to be reactive, and so it's going to be a really good session with Dermot around that. And then we've got Anne, who is an amazing mentor, expert, and she's been around for many decades. So we'll jump into to Dermot shortly. But if you can very quickly, with a bit of pen and paper, I just need you to do something for me now, please. Can you please think of a situation in the last couple of months where you've had to do something important, I suppose, for someone, for a client, for a colleague, for a supervisor, whatever it is in your workplace where you've had to react urgently. So, and then you can come back to that that situation later on or after the session. So, all right. Well, so we'll kick on to Dermot. So Dermot is an author. He's a trainer. He has got many decades of experience in, I suppose, mentoring and training and assisting workplaces with all sorts of situations. And when we discussed his new book, Urgent, I was literally blown away. That I suppose, a full disclaimer as well: Dermot and Anne are not hygienists, but when Dermot told me around the concepts and this new book that he's putting out, Urgent, it was literally like he knew exactly what hygienists do. So it's really yeah, awesome that we've got him on this webinar. So I will kick it over to Dermot. So yeah, so Dermot, if you want to take it away now, thank you so much.
Wonderful. Well, good morning, or it's now afternoon, everyone. So my name is Dermot Crowley. Just before I get going, give me a moment to share my screen and do all the things that need to happen to make this a fantastic experience for you guys. Let's get a slide up, and then we're done. Okay, so I'm here to talk to you about urgency and the whole idea of creating a sense of urgency, not senseless urgency. So what I'm about to share with you is actually based on my new book, which is coming out in a couple of weeks' time. So this gets published on the 1st of August. So you guys are getting a preview. It's so urgent, we're actually giving you a preview of what's in the book, which is really cool. So this is my third book. I've written a few books on productivity. So my whole experience in the workplace has been on personal and team productivity and helping people to work more productively, to get more done, but also helping organizations to create more productive cultures. And for many years, urgency has been an issue that really bugged me in organizations. And I wanted to find a way of being able to help people to deal with the urgency. But the challenge I had was most organizations didn't want to listen. Now, this perplexed me for a long time. And then one day, actually about a year ago, I'm in this beautiful place. I'm in the Cinque Terre in the Liguria in Italy. So my partner is from Milan in Italy. And unfortunately, we had to go back to Italy because her father was terminally ill. And we had to pay a visit. So it wasn't a great reason for the trip. But while we were there, she had a lot of things she needed to do. And she said to me, look, why don't you pack your bags and go off and enjoy yourself for a few days and explore the place? So I ended up in this beautiful place. And I realized that there was nothing urgent in my world at all. So I literally had 3 or 4 days ahead of me. And the most pressing issue that I had was whether I ordered a beer or I ordered an Aperol Spritz. And it was only mid-afternoon, so that was pretty cool. And when you're in a position where there's actually nothing urgent, you know what? That's probably the best time to examine urgency. And while I was there, I started writing the book. And I found an angle that I thought made sense and would be palatable in organizations like yours. So let's just have a look at what urgency is. If you go to the dictionary, the official Oxford Dictionary definition is importance requiring swift action. Now, I would question that because I think a lot of urgent stuff that we have to deal with isn't actually important, but that's what the Oxford Dictionary says. I kind of think of it as things that are time sensitive and maybe deadline driven activity. So there's often a deadline associated with urgency. But at the end of the day, urgency is really about I'll just go back there. It's really the driver of reactivity in organizations in the absence of proactivity. And I guess when I came to this presentation, I was thinking about an occupational hygienist and the sort of role that you guys have. It made me think that you're often dealing with situations that have been created because people have not been proactive. They have not taken the time to fix something or to prepare something properly or to clean something. And what that has led to is an urgent issue for them or for somebody else, or most probably for you on Friday afternoon, as Jason said. So I want you to hold that thought in your mind. It's the driver of reactivity in the absence of proactivity. So what? Who cares? Who cares if things are urgent? Some people actually thrive on urgency, and they would say to me, I don't really care too much. It doesn't really matter if things are urgent. Well, I think it does, because I reckon that when you've got too much urgency, it causes a lot of rework. So I reckon a lot of rework has to be done in the workplace because we have left things till the last minute and the quality of your work goes down. So that's one of the problems it causes. It causes a lot of stress. Like, you know yourselves, you're dealing with emails, you're dealing with urgent issues, everything is urgent, everything is ASAP. It builds the stress levels up enormously. And I reckon at the end of the day, it leads to burnout. People burn out, and we have a workplace health issue. We've got a well-being issue that is created because there is too much urgency. And you know what? In a lot of organizations, I reckon urgency is an inconvenient truth. So in 2006, Al Gore very firmly put climate change on the map in his documentary, An Inconvenient Truth. And one of his key messages was that climate change was an inconvenient truth to a lot of governments because they were interested in the economy and making sure that their economy was booming. And climate change kind of got in the way of that. I reckon that urgency is also an inconvenient truth in a lot of organizations. A lot of senior leaders and managers ignore the fact that there's a lot of urgency. They ignore the fact that there's a lot of reactivity. And I reckon that the problem is it's kind of become just a part of the territory. It's the norm. Everything is urgent around here, but that's our industry. I've heard that so many times over the years where people have said to me, but Dermot, you don't understand. We're an industry that we're in the consulting industry. We're in the finance industry. We're in the petrochemical industry. and they will tell me that the urgent scenarios in their organization happen because that's an industry thing. No, it's not. Industries aren't reactive by nature. Organizations aren't reactive by nature. It is people and their work styles that cause reactivity 99% of the time. So I guess one of the questions I want to pose to you is, are you a victim of your culture? Are you a victim of urgency? And is urgency a bit of an inconvenient truth in your organization? Wow. Big thoughts for an afternoon in Liguria with I ended up having an Aperol Spritz in the end. I actually had a couple of them. So what's your role as an occupational hygienist in the context of urgency? Well, I reckon that the first thing you need to think about is what you can control. And the only thing that you can really control are your own behaviors. So you need to control how you work. I reckon that you also need to then think about the people that might be around you, so the people in your team. And I reckon that we have a leadership role to play here. A lot of this whole session is about leadership. And I really believe in everyone taking the lead with this. You can't leave it to senior managers to do this. Everyone needs to take ownership and accountability over how urgency plays out in their workplace. I reckon on top of that, you've got the wider organization, and you might not be able to necessarily assert your leadership there, but you can certainly influence other teams. So Stephen Scott Johnson wrote a book called Emergent, which is all about cultural change. And he used the idea of creating ripples. So he said that cultural change happens at the team level. And what we need to do is create good cultural change and then create ripples across the organization and influence those around us. And then finally, I reckon there's even an education role when it comes to external stakeholders and partners. So I want you to think about what I'm about to share with you, some of the practical strategies. I want you to think about them at all of those levels. What can you do differently yourself to be more proactive? What do you need to do to lead this within your team? What can you do to influence it within your organization? And what can you do to educate the external stakeholders? So when it comes to the urgency itself, one of the key questions is the urgency caused by the fact that your environment is reactive, or is it you? And I reckon that it actually might be a little bit of both. So think about this. Some of you might work in what I would call a chaotic environment where it's very reactive and there's a culture of urgency and you're in the middle of that and it's really hard to deal with it. Some of you might be in a more ordered environment where the culture is just that bit more disciplined around urgency and things are pretty much proactive and planned for in a good way. So that's one dynamic. A second dynamic is your own work style. So you could have a reactive work style or you could have a proactive work style. Now, if you mix all that up together, what you'll probably find is this. If you're down in the bottom left-hand corner, this is what I call frenzied. And frenzied is in the dictionary described as excited, out of control. You see, there are some people who are actually attracted to chaotic environments because they've got very reactive work styles and it's a match made in heaven. They love it because they are in their element. And I couldn't think of a worse place to work myself, but some people actually thrive in that environment, or at least they think they thrive. I think the truth is they don't realize the impact that they're having on themselves and other people because of all of this urgency and reactivity. Some of you might identify with being disruptive. So you're in a more ordered environment, but you've got a very reactive work style. Or maybe you can think of one of your colleagues or one of the people that you're working with, and you know that this is them. So you're trying to create a nice ordered culture, but this person is just completely reactive. And they disrupt the productivity of those around them. Some of you might identify with being disrupted. So you're in a chaotic environment, but you've actually got quite a proactive work style. Isn't it terrible when you start a new job and you're all excited about the new job and then you realize that this workplace is pretty chaotic? So that might not be great for you. My belief is the best place to be is in the very top right-hand quadrant, where we've done some work on the culture of our team so that we've created a reasonably ordered environment, and we've done some work on ourselves so we've got a proactive work style. If that resonates for you, I think one of the handouts is a little diagnostic questionnaire that you can do that's going to help you to plot where you might sit based on a few questions. Really highly recommend that you don't do that now, but at some stage you print that off and just get a pencil and mark it out. It'll take you 5 minutes, but it might give you some good insights into what you think of your environment and what you think of your own work style. Okay, so let's now unbundle urgency itself. And one of the things that I want to be really clear about here is urgency is not the bad guy. It's a reality. We're all going to have to deal with urgency on a daily basis, okay? But as far as I'm concerned, there is productive urgency, and then there's unproductive urgency. So the first type of urgency that I tend to see on a regular basis is what I call fake urgency. And that's where things are made to seem like they're urgent, but they're not actually urgent at all. So that's either somebody else creating that situation, or it's you creating that situation. So you want to try and definitely avoid the fake urgency. There's also what I call avoidable urgency. So sometimes we've got things that are urgent, but they're only urgent because somebody else left them until the last minute and then put them on your lap. Or you left it until the last minute and then you had to deal with the issue yourself. So that's not ideal either. I reckon that in both of those cases, what we're dealing with is unproductive urgency. But the good news is there is a productive urgency, and it's what I call reasonable urgency. So I reckon that sometimes there are things that we could not have planned for, and there's an issue that has come up that we need to deal with, or there's an opportunity that we need to take advantage of. And I reckon that what we want to do is to try and minimize below the line the fake urgency and the avoidable urgency to put ourselves in a better position to deal with the reasonable urgency when it comes up, because this is productive. This is where you want to be most of the time if you can possibly swing it that way. So question now is, well, how do we do this? How do we make sure that we're avoiding the unproductive urgency and we're working on the reasonable and productive urgency? So here's a few strategies that I'm going to give you that will help you to do this. Now, the first one is a home strategy. And it's kind of very COVID relevant, I reckon. Does anyone have this situation where you go to the loo and there's no toilet paper in the loo? Now, I've got a 19-year-old son, and this happens quite a lot in our house. Now, I don't know how on earth it happens. Well, I do, because my son, unfortunately, is not as proactive as I am. You see, when the toilet roll runs out, he doesn't think ahead and anticipate other people's needs. If he's got enough for himself, he's got to go, and go he does. So I reckon that itself is just one of the simple things that we can do around urgency and proactivity. Just create a more mindful and purposeful mindset around urgency. Think about other people as well as yourself, and replace the toilet roll. It's not that hard, okay? But the real strategies are here. Okay, so the first one is be responsive, not reactive. Now, I'm going to try and be very whiz-bang here. I'm going to zoom into my blackboard. I just want to draw something up for you, because I reckon that there's a massive gap between what I would call reaction and response. You see, I see a lot of people who have what I call knee-jerk reactions. And the thing about a knee-jerk reaction is it actually bypasses the brain. So when they use the hammer to hit someone's knee and the knee goes up, that your knee doesn't send an impulse to your brain and say you've been hit by a hammer, and then your brain sends a message down to say lift your leg. It actually bypasses the brain and you react without thinking. I reckon that happens too often in the workplace. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to stop for a moment when something urgent comes in or something that seems like it's urgent. And I want you to fill the gap between reaction and response. And the 4 things that you're going to do to fill the gap are: number 1, pause. Number 2, I want you to evaluate and work out, is this really urgent? And is this more important than what I'm already trying to get done? Does this compete with my existing priorities? So just evaluate that in some way. Then I want you to prioritize and work out which is the most important thing for you to focus on. Don't just drop what you're doing to deal with this necessarily. Work out if this is the better priority. And then finally decide. So make a decision. I reckon that only takes you a few seconds. But if you do it, it kind of short circuits the whole process, and it stops you just blindly reacting. It gets you to think about what's happening. So be responsive, not reactive. The second key idea is don't cry wolf. So don't make things urgent if they're not, and don't make them more urgent than they need to be. We all know the story of the boy who cried wolf, and he cried wolf too many times when there wasn't a wolf and people stopped believing him. And then one day when there really was a wolf, nobody listened and the wolf ate the boy. Now, I saw this in action one day last year, got back from Italy. I'm a passenger in a car in Sydney, and I see this truck in front of me, and I grabbed my phone and I took a picture of it. It was classic. So at the back of the truck said, urgent, boat cover delivery. I cannot for the life of me think of a situation where we would need an urgent boat cover delivery. I'm sorry. That is an example of somebody crying wolf. Be careful and be mindful and purposeful about how you use urgency and how you allow other people to use urgency in your workplace. Third strategy is this: negotiate urgency. And this is something that you can do yourself when you're being delegated work, or other people are coming to you with urgent stuff. But it's something that you can mentor other people to do. So when Anne talks about mentoring, this is a fantastic mentoring strategy. So I like to think of the idea of dialing down the urgency. And I've got a set of dials here, which are all strategies that I can use to help me to moderate urgency. So if time is of the essence, so if someone comes along and says, we need this done by the end of tomorrow, then one of the dials that I've got available to me is quality. So I could say, okay, we can meet that deadline, but it's not going to be as good as if you gave me till the end of next week. Is that okay? So there's a negotiation point. Or if they want better quality, sometimes we need to dial the time differently. We need to say, okay, I can do better, but I need a few more days. So these are both variables that we can control. And it's not just time and quality. We've got these other ones as well. We've got the scope of the work. We've got the resources. So if you've got more resources, we can do it quicker, that type of thing. The budget. So maybe if we spend more, we can do a better quality or in less time. And in some workplaces, I think risk is a really important one for you guys. That's one of the things you need to think about. Okay, we could do this quicker, but that's going to increase the risk. Do we have the appetite to increase the risk with that? This is something that I reckon you people should be talking to your people about and helping them to make this not theoretical, but just a really practical way of having a conversation around this stuff. So the urgency dial is really, really useful. Okay, now the final thing that I want to finish on here is this idea. I believe that the best way to be proactive and to anticipate better in the workplace is to make time to plan. So when, I run a lot of work on personal productivity, and we're often showing people how to use tools like Outlook to manage their schedule and their priorities. But the point I want to make is this. Quite often, people will schedule their inputs into their system. So they've got emails coming in and they'll make time to deal with those. They've got paperwork coming across their desk. They've got meetings that go into their schedule or into their task list. That's great. That's all a part of being productive. But I believe that if you really want to have an impact in your role, what you need to do is not just schedule the inputs, you also need to schedule the outcomes. And this is what turns people from being reactive into people that are proactive. So when I'm thinking about my outcomes, the big picture, I first of all think about people. Who are some of the key people that I need to have conversations with? Mentoring is a fantastic example of this. Mentoring will not happen unless you actually schedule time into your calendar or a task into your task list to pick up the phone and call that person and make the time, because mentoring is a really high value activity, but it's not urgent. That's the problem. Our priorities, our big picture priorities, our projects, they should all be driven into our schedule as well as our inputs. And when you do that, it forces you to be more proactive, working on the things that are important in your role. Darren Martin said, today you can be inactive, reactive, or proactive. Choose your active wisely. Thank you all very much. I'm going to throw back to Jason now, and I'll stop sharing my slide and I'll put myself on mute.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dermot. That was really insightful. And yeah, I think just some of those things around negotiating urgency, I think that is just gold. If we can negotiate our urgency with our clients, with our bosses, with our supervisors, the managers, yeah, that would be excellent. So yeah, thank you. More questions for Dermot later on. All right, let's jump into Anne's presentation. So thank you so much, Anne. So we're going to get a really good drill down into mentoring now. Obviously, I'm the mentoring chair for the Institute. So my plug is if you haven't been a mentor or a mentee, I encourage you to join. And there'll be a big carrot at the end of this session for that. So I'll throw it over to Anne. So she's an amazing mentor. She has been for many decades. She's done a lot of obviously training. She's a award-winning author. She's got a brand new book out, Mentoring Mindset. And so I will hand it over to Anne. Take it away, Anne. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Great to be with you. And what a great presentation, Dermot. That was fabulous. Thanks. I found myself really nodding away with some of the comments that you were making, particularly about organisations wanting to listen when you want to talk to them about being effective. So let me get my slides up on screen and we can get going. So thank you very much for this opportunity. And I want to talk about mentoring, obviously. And because good mentoring conversations draw out the mentee's values, priorities and aspirations, and they create insight and awareness and enable candid explorations of strengths, challenges and opportunities for personal and professional and career development. And obviously, as Dermot said in his final comments, you just don't have time for this if you're bound up with that non-productive urgency all the time. So in this presentation, I'm hoping to talk to you about and answer your questions about what are the benefits for both mentors and mentees. In other words, why is mentoring important? I'm going to talk about what makes mentoring conversations effective. And here I'm hoping to give you some practical tools and talk a little bit about what are the essential skills for mentoring, some food for thought about the abilities you need to develop. And the good news is that these skills benefit you at work, in progressing your career, and indeed in your personal life. So let's look at what the benefits are for both mentors and mentees. And some people are surprised when I say there are benefits for mentors, because of course a lot of mentors volunteer for altruistic reasons in mentoring programs such as the one that will be spoken about later on. But we need to acknowledge the real value in volunteering to be a mentor. And yet I would like to emphasize that there are benefits for both mentors as well as the mentees. So we will start with the mentees. Your formal learning qualifies you as a professional. Mentoring extends that competence by contextualizing those general skills to the specific workplace or organization. Mentoring conversations add to the depth of your understanding, and the mentor's experience can allow you to learn from their mistakes, their challenges, and their success, not just your own. And this increases your capability overall, your capability and your professional judgment, problem solving, and critical thinking are all improved as a result of these relationships and conversations. And of course, this has positive implications for your career. Through mentoring, you can amplify your strengths, identify areas of most interest, and of course, focus on the goals and the actions that will move you in your chosen directions. But as I said, most great mentors that I talk to say that they get a lot out of mentoring as well. So this is where they do volunteer for altruistic reasons, and they want to contribute to their profession, give back, or support the new generation. However, today we recognise that mentoring and coaching are vital components of leadership. Mentoring increases the skills required of managers. And another aspect is that especially important and urgent right now is that resilience. Because mentoring is about building relationships and strengthening our communication and connection to one another, it develops high-level skills and supports that enable both mentor and mentee to cope with crisis and change. In short, it's good for the mental health and emotional well-being of both parties. The organisation benefits as well, because when you support mentoring, you give a signal that you want people to stop and think about what's important, to be strategic, to become proactive. And rather than getting stuck in that treadmill of chronic urgency, it demonstrates that you really value people, and both the tacit knowledge, experience and wisdom that mentors offer and the career development of the professionals they develop. But the bottom line is mentoring programs increase employee engagement, which leads to improved productivity. Now, Sam, we've got a poll. If you could just put up the poll for us. And there's some questions there. If participants, you can select one of these responses about your own mentoring experience. So just choose one of those. We'll just have a minute or two to respond to those, just so we can get an idea about what your actual experience is and how many of you are actually involved in your professional mentoring program. So how are we going there, Sam? Just waiting for those votes to come in. And once we've got about a 70% response rate, Sam's going to share those results with you. How are we going with that, Sam?
77% of the audience is responding. So I think you can fairly say that most of the people have been a mentor or mentee in the past. So I'll lead you on to it.
Okay, and can you share?
Oh, they can see it on their screen on the right-hand side.
Oh, okay. The results. I don't see mine. Okay. All right. Well, I'll just I'll continue. So I wanted to talk about what makes a mentoring conversation effective, and in that we're really looking at some ideas about the mentoring relationship at all. And this is one of the models that I've been using for a long time to really explain how mentoring works these days. We have this traditional view of mentoring where the older idea is that a mentor is someone who has a lot of knowledge and experience, and their job is to share that or impart it with someone they're mentoring. But in fact, what I'd suggest to you is that even before a mentor starts to share that knowledge and experience, they really have to build a relationship and have conversations where they are eliciting. In other words, asking questions and really listening to the mentee. Because as I said at the outset, this is about finding out the needs and the wants and the values, what's important, the priorities of the mentee, the person being mentored. We also have a traditional view that mentoring is about supporting the mentee, encouraging them, validating, and it certainly is. But sometimes we learn best from those who challenge us, who provide a different perspective, allow us to see a different point of view. So I use this model to suggest to you that mentoring is a dynamic relationship. It's a dynamic conversation where we're moving and changing and adjusting all the time in response to the needs and wants and the values of the mentee. So it's not an either or, it's more about moving from one end of the spectrum to another according to the situation. So at the heart of the mentoring conversation are questions that really empower mentees. And here are the questions. These aren't necessarily the questions you're going to ask a mentee or will be asked of you as a mentee, but these are the questions that a mentor holds in their mind to frame the actual conversation, the actual questions that they ask. So question one is, where are you now? Tell me about the current situation, the problems, the challenges, the issues that are on your mind. And then the question then is, where do you want to be? How would you like that to look? What is your vision of the future? Or what's a better alternative outcome that you'd like to be producing? And then the conversation can be constructive around, well, how might you get there? What changes need to happen? What could you do proactively to move from where you are now to where you actually want to be? So in order to get there, to have these sorts of conversations, we need to have certain skills that make that work. And the basic skills, the essential skills, are firstly to build rapport and trust with the person we're having these conversations with. Because we want to be open, we want to be genuine, and we want to have a real sharing of ideas here. We need to be able to listen well, and we need to be able to ask good questions. So I quickly want to run through some of these ideas around each of these three areas. The first area is that of trust and rapport. And what I believe is there's a trust zone that you develop and you expand when you interact with other people. And there are four components to that. There's one component which is your credibility, your reliability is another, mutuality, and reciprocity. So let's look at, and some of these are emotional and some of these are quite rational. So in the credibility space, it's the things that tell me that I can believe you, I can believe in you. Things like your integrity. I can say that you are, I have the assumption, I have the belief that you are honest and congruent. You mean what you say and you say what you mean. Also, I have a trust in your capabilities so that you know what you're talking about, you have the skills, and you inspire confidence in me. The next area is that of reliability, which allows me to say, well, I can count on you, you are reliable. And this comes down to things like your performance. You actually are a person with demonstrated results and you are effective. You're a role model, if you like, of effectiveness and that proactivity. And you are consistency. You show up, you meet your commitments over time. These are the things that tell me I can rely on you. The mutuality then is about the belief that you and I benefit. There's not a hidden agenda here. You're in this with good intentions. So you are positive and you care about us, not just you. So you're not just in it for yourself. And your motivation is transparent. There's not a hidden agenda going on. And then the next one is a little bit surprising, perhaps. When I looked into the research about trust, I discovered that there's a reciprocity element to it. I will trust you more if you demonstrate that you actually trust me. In other words, you respect me, you acknowledge me as a person with knowledge, an adult. You respect my autonomy, my right to make my own decision, and you don't ride roughshod over my personal rights. And you demonstrate confidence in me. So you have some faith in my ability and my commitment to getting things done. So I find that quite interesting, that this is what turns up in the research, those 4 areas. And you might want to take away and think about these things in terms of, well, how do I come across to other people, whether you're a mentor or a mentee? Because as Dermot said, this is about leadership. And to me, leadership and mentoring are becoming so closely aligned now. We need to think about all 4 of these areas in terms of our personal leadership and the way we come across in the world. So let me talk a little bit about listen well. And obviously I'm only in this short time able to touch on the surface. But one of the major problems we have with listening is our brains. Our brain has a capacity that far exceeds the speed of speech. I'm trying to speak quite quickly now, and yet your brain has way more capacity than I have in terms of speaking. What does the brain do with all that excess capacity? Well, anything it wants to. It goes off on a little side trip, and it'll be thinking about lunch if you've had it or not had it, and those sorts of things. Another problem is our ears never close. You know, we can give our eyes a rest. You know, you can close your eyes, give them a little rest, but your poor ears never close. Even when you're sleeping, they are taking in that information and the brain's processing it. And the brain does process it, but there are some filters that protect us from becoming overloaded. And sometimes those filters work a little bit too well. They take over sometimes. So I want to give you a quick quiz here. So you need pen and paper for this. I'd like you to write down, if you would, numbers 1 to 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, just on a piece of paper. I'm going to give you 9 statements, and you're going to rate yourself on these statements. In terms of your listening, is this something you never do? Give yourself a 0. Sometimes do, give yourself a 1. Often do, you get a 2, and always do, you get a 3. So are you ready? You've got 1 to 9 written down on your sheet, and you're going to write your rating next to that. Here's statement number 1. When I am listening, I find myself easily distracted. So give yourself a 0, 1, 2, or 3 on that. I'm going to rattle through these quite quickly. You've got a rating for number 1. Are you easily distracted? Point number 2, faking attention, acting polite. My daughter calls this nodding and smiling, you know. So do you sometimes do that? Never do it? Often? Always? You don't have to share this information, so be as honest as you can with your responses here. So hopefully you've rated that. Faking attention, is that something you do sometimes, often? Number 3, when I am listening, I find myself reacting to emotional words, you know, those buttons that, those words that press your button. Never? You got that totally under control? Sometimes, depends what the word is. Often or always. Give yourself a rating, because here comes statement number 4. When I'm meant to be listening, when I'm listening, I find myself interrupting frequently. Are you an interrupter? The purpose of this is to actually find out which is your hot spot, which is the area you need to work on. So be honest, only you will see this. Are you an interrupter? They can't get their sentence out. Okay, do you tune out on uninteresting topics? So you fade away. That brain takes you on a little side trip, and you come back when you think it's necessary, or when you realise you've gone on the side trip. So give yourself a rating on that. Tuning out on uninteresting topics. What about daydreaming? That's a little bit similar. Daydreaming, if the speaker's a bit too slow. What about jumping to conclusions? Have you got it worked out already? You know what they're going to say. You know what comes next. Give yourself a rating, 0, 1, 2, or 3 on that. Jumping to conclusions, making assumptions. What about number 8? We've got 8 and 9 to go. So number 8, finding fault with the message. So you go into critique mode. You go into finding fault with the message, or indeed the messenger. Sometimes we do this. And number 9, thinking of what I want to say. So even as they are speaking, do you find yourself thinking of what you're going to say next? And you're simply waiting for them to run out of puff so you can jump in with your response. So don't need to know what your scores were, but you do. And if you were to add them up, you'd find that 27 is the highest score and the lowest is 0. But quite frankly, I think if any of us got a 0, we're kidding ourselves. Obviously, the lower the score, the better. But what I want you to do with this is really identify what you're worst at. So you know where the area is that perhaps you want to be more conscious of in the next few days and really work on that. So if it's thinking of what you want to say, how can you turn that around so that you put that aside and really listen to understand what it is that the person is really trying to get across. So really quickly, I want to move on to questions. And I did mention at the heart of the mentoring conversation, there are those 3 questions. Where am I now? Where do I want to be? How do I get there? They're not the questions that the mentor actually asks, but they are the questions that are in mind to frame up actual questions. But there's an art to asking questions, apart from having the questions and getting the wording right. There's more of an attitude in the way that you ask those questions. So I want to quickly give you 3 techniques that I think will help you in all your other work as well. So the first technique I want to share with you is an idea called cushions. And these are questions you ask before you ask the actual question. They soften the question. And it's the words and it's the non-verbal communication, the tone of voice, your body language if you're being seen by the other person. Phrases like, do you mind if I ask? And then you ask the question. I'm wondering, which brings across your respectful curiosity. And would you like to tell me? So you're inviting the person to open up to you. And this cushion technique is a beautiful technique. It's one you need practice so that it comes naturally when you need it. And it's not just the words, it's combined with your non-verbal communication, your tone of voice, your body language that comes into this. Oh, my cat's coming to visit now. Okay, the next technique is probing. So you've asked a question, but you want to go a bit deeper. You want to find out some more. And again, little phrases that you tack on to the beginning of your question. Can you say a little bit more about that? Would you like to expand on that? Perhaps you'd like to tell me how. And again, your non-verbal communication needs to communicate your respectful curiosity, or in some cases, your professional curiosity and need to know. And then the third technique is summarizing. And this is how you check that you've really understood what they've said, or give them a second chance to actually clarify what they said. Because, you know, sometimes we say something that's not, we haven't really got to what we mean. So it's a kind of feedback. So what you're saying is, and then you briefly summarize what you got from their comments. What I'm hearing is, so putting your perspective and in your own words, saying what you got, or saying something like from your point of view. And you're giving them a flag, a heads up that, hey, that's one way of looking at this, but maybe there are other ways. So finally, in conclusion, before I hand back, I'd like to say that all of these skills are terrific and there's many of them, but what you really bring that makes mentoring a success is your mindset, the attitudes, the values and the philosophy that you bring as one person reaching out to another person in a mentoring conversation that is both proactive and productive for everyone involved. So thanks for hearing me today, and I'll hand back now. I'm going to hand back.
Great. That was really excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah. So so we've had two very good topics there. So yeah, well, I think I've put down into the chat there. Please, if you can, put in your questions into the chat, and then we can get through them relatively quickly. So yeah, I think we've got still plenty of time for a few questions. So yeah. We'll get into those. I think we've got one here from Russell Bond, and he's saying, Anne, this is one for you. He's saying, why do we need to cushion? Oh, you got your, you just need to unmute. Yep.
Need to cushion. It's a good question. It's because we really want mentoring conversations. We really want to connect with people. We want to open up. We want to have real candid conversations. And so you don't want to come across as someone who's interrogating someone who's prying, if you like. So it's just being a little bit more polite and softening that question so it's not too hard-hitting and, gets them defensive. The biggest enemy of communication, I believe, is defensiveness. And so if you can do anything that stops people getting concerned or worried about the need to defend themselves, because the brain is actually on high alert all the time. It's looking for threats in the environment. And if the brain feels threatened, and it is that reactive response, just like the hammer on the knee, the brain kicks in and starts to throw up barriers to communication. So by softening, by cushioning your questions, you're actually calming the brain down and saying, it's okay, you don't have to get alarmed by this. This is not a threat. This is a conversation that you can relax into.
Yeah, so yeah, Russell just had a further comment there. Wouldn't we reserve those techniques for potentially sensitive topics? Question mark. Otherwise, direct questioning is okay. And does that, yeah?
I think you need to be mindful that it's a sensitive topic, yes. But I think, and I think you don't want to come off too hesitant either. So there's a lot of adjustment to be made depending on the circumstances. And if I had longer, I'd talk about the facilitative style of communication and the authoritative style. And I think Russell is coming from the place of the authoritative style where, yes, you do use more direct questions. And the skill is really in being able to balance those two styles of communication and having the understanding of when to do that. So yes, there's a time for direct questioning and there's a time for just easing up a little bit.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a good balance there, I suppose, depending on the situation. Yeah, on the people, whether or not it's a high stress sort of situation, or whether it's not so stress or stress free potentially. So. So yeah, has anyone got any more questions?
For Dermot, it's come through my email. It's from someone who had listed or seen Dermot's talks or the books before. The question is, how do you initiate those difficult conversations? So you talk about urgency and you talk about being proactive and not reactive. But what are the strategies? Because quite often the discussion is amongst someone who is more senior to you. And it's always that difficult line to cross, and ultimately it's their decision, but you're trying to communicate effectively to do your job better. So how would you recommend, or what's your tips?
Yeah, look, it is a challenge, and I recognise that in a lot of these circumstances, people are dealing with urgency from different parts of the organisation where they don't have any authority, and that can be challenging. But a bit like what Anne was talking about, I think that there's leadership that comes from your position, and that's often referred to as positional authority. But there's also a more informal type of authority that comes with having good influencing skills. And, I think that requires you to build credibility with people and to be consistent in your approach. So if you consistently call out urgency, so for instance, if you have a person who always, everything they bring to you is urgent, if you let it sometimes go through to the keeper and then sometimes you call them on it, then they're just going to push back on you. But if you consistently call them on it and then in a very respectful way, talk to them about the fact that every time you bring me something urgent, it has this impact on my role, then they kind of get used to the fact that you're not being hard to work with, you're not being a pain, you're actually just trying to get work done in a reasonable way. So that's one thing I'd say. And then the other thing I would say is it is a cultural issue, and it's really, really hard when you're a lone voice in a destructive culture. So I believe that it requires you to, get people who are maybe more senior than you to have your back. So a friend of mine, Charles, works for a big organization, big bank. And one of the things that he talks to me about is the fact that he expects his people to get complaints from the rest of the business. He said, in fact, if they don't get complaints, then they're not doing their job properly. So he actually wants them to push back on urgency, because if he doesn't get those complaints from the business about them, then he knows that they're not pushing back enough. But when he does get a complaint about them, he backs them 100%, because he knows that in those situations, they're doing the right thing, they're doing their job. So they've got alignment around that, and I think that that's something that can help. But there's not enough time to go through all of the nuances. It is a challenging thing, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of guidance.
To head off, so you might want to wrap up. Dermot, this one's for you as well. What techniques would you recommend to determine fake urgency?
Good question. So we are dealing with honesty here, and I could say, well, just ask the person, is this really urgent? And the chances are they'll go, yeah, it is, even though it's not, and we have to deal with that. But look, I think it's about questioning. It's about always asking why. And I know that seems simplistic. Simon Sinek talks about, start with why. Why is this urgent? These are interesting questions to consistently ask people. So, why is this, or why do you think this is urgent? And is it really urgent? But also, if you establish that it is urgent, how has this happened? Why is it every time you bring us stuff, it's urgent? And generally, you'll find it's because people haven't planned properly, or they've left things until the last minute. Sometimes there's going to be scenarios where it just happened and we couldn't have planned for it, but a lot of the time it's happened because of people's poor planning. So I think it comes back to those questions and the consistency that you ask them with.
Yeah, and I'll also add to that, Dermot, there's I suppose a technical side to that fake urgency, and I think as occupational hygienists, I suppose that's what we're trained and experienced to do, to anticipate the hazards, to recognise the hazards, and then go into investigation and control mode. So yeah, I think that comes with experience and knowledge as well, and also mentoring as well. So, good question.
And maybe if you don't have that experience, maybe you need to get advice. You need to go to someone and say, is this a problem? There's a great scene, I think, maybe in Apollo 13, Tom Hanks, where an alarm goes off in the capsule and it's going beep, 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 beep. And Tom Hanks very coolly says, Houston, is this a problem? And Houston checks it out and goes, no, you can ignore that. So he actually goes to the command and says, should I be worried about this? Maybe sometimes we need to do that.
Just another question there, I think from Russell. Dermot, I suppose people won't always agree on what is fake urgent, question mark, e.g. different people have different objectives.
Yeah, it's very subjective. What is urgent to you is not urgent to me. What is important to you is not important to me, and necessarily, and vice versa. So that's why it's all in negotiation, and that's why those urgency dials can be helpful, because what they open up is a meaningful discussion that can help both of you to find the way through, because we all want to get the work done, but we just have lots of competing priorities. So I think we just need to have tools available to open those productive discussions up.
Good question. And that, the urgency dials there, I think just aligns with that perfectly. So yeah, awesome. Any more questions? We could probably do another one question, I reckon, Sam. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yep. Well, let's finish up. So thank you so much, Anne. Thank you, Dermot. Awesome presentations. Really insightful. There's some really simple take-home messages there, I think, for hygienists and other safety and health professionals. Really, I mean, it's translated into any sort of risk-related work. I feel. So thank you so much. And as part of the mentoring committee, for the next 6 new mentors and 6 new mentees that come on board in the Institute, they will get a free copy, an e-copy of Dermot and Anne's latest book. So I'm most excited about that. So yeah, so if you want to jump on and register as a mentor or register as a mentee on the website. Just go onto the website and you'll be able to see the link for to actually get onto the application for that. So I encourage you to do that. I think that's just about it. So thank you so much. Have I missed anything, Sam?